Alright, glad to have you back. In this next part, I want to start introducing something more advanced. Extensions of level 4 I like calling the amazing levels. We're starting with the level 4.1. Well, it's still level 4, so let's go for a level 4 stab, and it does not work. On this level, people are looking to outstrafe you much like in level 4, but this time they're doing it by backing off. See, the moment I go forwards, he flies all the way back, and then he outstrafes me from the other side. So level 4 stab or level 1 stab, it's hard to say what we should do really. I don't really have to say that these people are very hard to reach. Now this amazing strafe is fundamentally different from the level 1 strafe, from people who are just backing off. For now, the best way I can explain it is this is a backing off strafe, right? Okay? And this is an amazing strafe. This exaggerated thing is what we're dealing with. It always outstrafes you. You think you're close enough, and then this is really the closest you can get. So there are a couple of things for why this is happening, so let's just dive right in. Well, in order to outstrafe you like this, they can't just back off normally, right? They have to attack from the side, and then they're able to back off to your side. They have to go sideways a little bit when going forwards, right? I want you to look at what he's doing. He's attacking from the side, then backing off. And attacking from the side, and backing off. Let's take a look at this guy from before. He's strafing across the wall, then he backs off. He's attacking from the side, but he's backing off. Let's take a look at this next guy. He's gonna be strafing across the wall, but can you see him backing off instead of getting behind you completely? Managed to get him with a level 1 stab on the wall there, which is really unlikely. And I'm gonna tell you why it's even more unlikely with level 4.1. He's gonna be attacking from the side and then he's gonna be backing off, right? But by attacking from the side like this, he puts himself in a position to potentially turn. So even if you get close enough with a level 1 stab, he's going to be breaking away. These people are putting themselves in a position where if you get close, they get to change what they're doing. So these guys are still on level 4 and they're doing level 4 things like breaking away and letting you pass. But if you go for a level 4 stab, you're not getting it because they're backing off, even though they were attacking from the side. And not to mention all the managed Matador techniques that you're not getting on them because of how intense and wide their movement is. So you try to go for a level 1 stab, only to find them breaking away again. So it's impossible. You go for 1 stab and they choose the other form of movement. By attacking from the side, they're giving themselves the chance to turn and then potentially break away from you if they want to. And that's if they don't just outstrafe you right away. This is why this level is amazing. They get to change what they do. They get to choose to suddenly change their form of movement. Simply put, you're not getting a basic stab on them usually. But still, they can turn the strafe and break away, and in case they do, you do have a slight opening to stab them sometimes. He's gonna take it wide, back off, then break away. You can just only sometimes get this stab, but it's very unreliable. And it's a lot more confusing than just that to fight somebody on 4.1. Takes it wide and backs off, then suddenly does it again. But miracles sometimes happen. See, this guy is gonna turn the strafe, but he's not gonna break away, and I get him. And these things happen even to the best players. This guy can jump to my side and jump backwards, which is really skillful movement-wise. But sometimes I can still get him with this. So sometimes you can get backpedal stabs like this, mostly on the ones who are not as used to breaking away. And if you're getting it, it's almost always going to be because of the adjustments. It's always going to be very close. Also, even if they turn completely, sometimes you can extend it into a backpedal stab, sometimes. Or you could try anticipating them turning the strafe in the first place, forcing them into the stab. But that's not very reliable either, isn't it? So sometimes if you get over or under them, you avoid bumping into them and you can get the stab. Exactly as it was in the previous levels. See, I get under him here, whereas if we were on the same plane, he would have just bumped into me and denied me the stab. Same thing here, only from above. See how much he's gonna turn the strafe? If we were on the same plane, I would have not been able to get him. Same thing here, I go for the stab, I can't get to him. The next time he's gonna back off, go for an overhead angle, which again allows me to ignore bumping into him. So yeah, obviously these kinds of things can happen, but usually they're not very reliable either. So moving on a little bit, this action of taking something wide and then backing off kinda reminds us of something, right? Reminds us of C2C. So let's talk about corners for a bit. C2C is just a level 1 stab, which would usually not work here because they turn the strafe. But if it's just enclosed in enough, it could work even though they turn it. Also about corners, in the corner, forwards and backwards strafes turn into left and right strafes because they have no space behind them. Backing off becomes sideways. Also, when you're in a corner, the angle turns, so he's strafing forwards and backwards right now, but I can treat it as if it was left and right, and I can cut the corner and stab him that way. But still, we just went over some things that could help you against these people, but none of them are really reliable or consistent. Level 4 stab doesn't work, level 1 stab hardly works. We need to find a reliable way to get these guys, and this is where it starts. So what even happened here? He outstrafes me by going forwards and backwards, okay. Then he goes around me. But we know that at this point, I can't get him with a level 4 stab because he's gonna back off, and you can't even go for a backpedal stab. So instead of doing those, you start the stab like you do with level 4, you let him get to your side, and then as you're pressed against him, you go for the backpedal stab. So this stab that combines the level 4 and the level 1 stabs is actually glue. So what does this glue stab actually do for us here? Why do we use it? Well, let's break it down. When a person on 4.1 is attacking you from the side, he's opening up an opportunity for himself to turn should you strafe to his side. But rather than running to his side, when you run at his face, you're still in front of him. When you use glue, you don't get to his side, so he can't turn to his side. If anything, he turns away because of the adjustments. Look at the difference between what happens here and what happens the next time. By sticking to him like this, you don't give him the chance to turn. It's about fixing the adjustments so they would be locked on looking forwards. Let's take a look at this guy. Try to strafe around him. He backs away to the side, breaks away. But when I go for glue, I fix his adjustments forwards like this, so he couldn't turn or keep away from me. Now that's what usually happens, but it's either that or they do turn, but by gluing to them, you've gone further back than where they turned to. Let's explain this for a second. This guy's gonna attack me from the side, rounding the corner, and then he backs off and he can turn, and I'm right there in front of him. But if I stick to him, when he turns, he's not gonna see me anywhere when he backs off, unlike before. And he's already turned as much as he can before backing off, so he can't turn more than that. You see, when you're circle strafing, you leave him space to walk into you, which means that if he turns, he sees you. But if you run at him, if you glue to him, he turns, and then you're just not there anymore. I actually started understanding why sticking so close like this is that important in this next clip right here. I'm gonna attack from the side and he's gonna walk and I'm gonna outstrafe him. Then he walks again and he's just not there. This is why, by the way, it's really important to look back at things that happen to you when they do. He didn't stab me there because he didn't try to, he was just trying to get to the health. Which brings me to my next point. When you are stabbing as a spy, you are on level 4. Meaning that you make this half of a circle thing when you're trying to do it, even if you're trying not to. And this space between you lets them turn at you. See, even if you're trying to run at a person's face and really just trying to walk into him while stabbing, the moment you pull out your knife, you hit the strafe key and you turn the mouse and that makes a circle, whether you like it or not. See, this spy is gonna come at me in a second, gonna outstrafe me, and at this point, you'd usually go like this, trying to go around him. But had I done that, I would have made a half of a circle and I wouldn't have gotten as far behind him as I did. I would have also given him the space to turn a little more and to break away. So let's just recap a little bit for now. This guy, 4.1, amazing backward strafe, breaks away from me, and goes around me, then backs off. So just remember, they start the level 4 movement, then they back off across something. The stab itself can happen where you lock their adjustments forwards, or it could also happen when they've turned but you've gone further than they turned. Both of these cases are only possible because you stick to them, so now we know why it's so important while doing the glue stab. When they're moving around, always try to imagine a corner or a turn or something that they take wide and then they back off to. It generally helps to see this game as turns and corners. You can actually just practice this stab with C2C. Give your side to the player, and then turn and try to stab him. But actually, why is that? Why do you have to run straight and give your side to him? You can just do it more normally. Just turn and press W instead of running forwards. It doesn't have to be that hard because you know where he's coming from and you know how the stab is gonna end. So that's the thing. You don't. People who have this amazing strafe can keep out strafing you by surprise even if you think you're gonna get it. So the stab doesn't always end on the side which you thought it would. See how many times he keeps crossing me over here? Unlike when you're going for a normal circle strafe or a backpedal stab, you don't know how this is gonna end. I really can't determine that it's like this right now and just turn to that side to begin with. It's not gonna work most of the times, and that's because they're going to keep out strafing you by surprise. They're gonna keep crossing you over, and neither of you really knows how it's gonna end. But let's go a little deeper into how this works. How do you just run like an idiot and somehow do something that works? Well, let's take a look at this here. Let's see how this goes. I go for the circle strafe, and hell if that works because of, well, everything. So I run at him, he went forwards, and now he's gonna go backwards, and he outstrafes me, right? So at this point he gets to my right, so I look forwards and press the right key. But what's this? He's crossed me over again, so now I'm gonna run forwards and press the left key. And at this point, I don't feel like I'm moving to the left anymore, which means I'm bumping into him, which means I can turn and try for the stab again. So in a nutshell, you need to keep strafing towards him with really shallow strafes that will let him get to your side. He's supposed to just see you running forwards and wiggling back and forth. Again, I run at this guy, he strafes to the right, I strafe right, he strafes left, I strafe left. And at this point, I don't feel like I'm going left anymore, which means he's trying to move to the right, but he can't do it. He can't cross me over. So now, I can turn for a stab. One more example. I go for this guy, he backs off, outstrafes me. I run at him holding the right key. I run at him holding the left key. I feel that he's blocking me, so I turn and I stab him. Now again, at this point, it does not work like a level 1 stab. If I go around him here, I will give him space to turn at me, which is something I don't want. Here's an example. I'm gonna try to glue this guy, running to the right, then he crosses me over, goes to the left, and instead of going to the left and continue gluing him, I go around him, which is bad. I gave him the space to turn and get behind me again. You have to keep glued to him. This is still the exact same stab as before. This is just a twist for people who don't strafe across immediately and spam forwards and backwards. Now, especially for people who aren't strafing across some wall or something immediately, making it obvious, you don't know how it's gonna end. It can end in a lot of ways. Since you're running straight at them, you can get confused, but you're expecting it. So everything that's gonna happen is gonna be within what you expect. And it can also unfortunately end with them getting completely away from you, which can also happen. My point is, none of this is a reason to not do it. This is how the stab works. Locking yourself forwards like this doesn't restrict you. Running straight isn't bad in this situation. It's just how the stab works, and just like how you get used to circle strafing, you get used to doing this mid-combat, gunfight and everything, and you're just running straight. Now, speaking of people who are spamming movement, how can this level exactly combine with level 3? Strafing around, remember that? Well, this is a pretty good example. Spy strafing left and right, but when I go for the free spot, he turns on me. Again, these people can easily outstrafe your circle strafes, so the same thing happens when you try to go for a free spot. See, he turned, he's not walking into me. I got kinda lucky there because of the wall, but it typically doesn't work. So instead of going for the free spot, strafe with him and go for the glue stab. See, because he does the same thing, you should go for the same thing. It's simple, he's on level 3, and then when you get close, he's on level 4.1. But there are actually several ways of doing this. Like we've seen before, a lot of people spam forwards and backwards like it was level 3, trying to outstrafe you that way, or just trying to be fast. This guy, for example, is trying to outstrafe me by going left and right and backwards. So sometimes it depends on how they do it. So it can be simple, you can go for just a circle strafe or just a level 3 stab, but it depends on what he does more. For better players, it gets more complicated and you want to be able to pull it consistently instead of just once. Now this next guy is gonna be juking and on 4.1, which works out for us because both forms of movement are countered by glue. So that's a very nice coincidence of movements. And speaking of those, going back to the level 3 section again, if a spy is on 4.1 or juking or both, it's scary to go for glue because you're practically running with W, so he can stab you. But if he's a spy who tries to stab you, he has to do it with a longer sideways strafe. So again, you can just go for a counter stab normally if you know that's what he does. And that's it about that. But as you can see, there's still time for this video. At the beginning, I talked about more extensions that level 4 has, and this is the next one. The amazing 4.2. Now this level is much more like the level 4 that we already know, the normal level 4. Only this time it's taken to an extreme. They take things extremely wide, passively or aggressively. They time it unlike others in order to outstrafe you. Sometimes to circle strafe you. One very obvious thing according to which you can identify this level is that from the beginning they take very wide circles. They never get close to you unless they're sure of themselves. But we already have people like this, so what's the difference? Well, people who are on point 2 are going to be taking something wide, and then they will continue to widen the circle until the point where they're just moving sideways. It's easy to explain this movement in a corner, when even after taking a corner wide, he keeps moving to the side and away from you. Let's take a look at this scout. He's gonna take it wide, but he's gonna keep moving sideways after the wall stops restricting him. He wasn't stuck on the line of the wall. He could keep widening the circle after it ended. Although people who can only do this in corners aren't worth mentioning. We're talking about people who can do this on the outside. So yeah, usually they take strafes so wide that you can't do anything about. But much like any other level 4, by taking wide strafes, they eventually get to the sideways walls. But if you catch him strafing across the wall, you can use that to your advantage. So you can lure these people into someplace enclosed off and there's a lot of walls, and catch them there because they won't be able to pull sideways anymore as much. Normal level 4s are very restricted with how much they can pull sideways, and these people aren't. So you can use the wall to completely restrict them and bring them down to the level of normal level 4s again. Now speaking of things that will work on all level 4s, the manage your Matador techniques are something you will not be able to do with people with the amazing 4.2. Here the guy tried to inbox me between the wall and himself, but I bump into the ceiling and land sooner than he expected, messing up his timing. It's the only reason I got that. But basically, yeah, they're very wide level 4s, so you go for very wide level 4 stabs on them. Simple. But then again, you don't really want to do it normally because they expect to get to your side. So again, any stab you'd want to go for is going to be an early level 4 stab. You always want him in front of you, you never want to let him get to your side before you go backwards. You go sooner than you expect, all of that, all of what we know. Then again, it's kind of hard to do, so you're going to have to get used to doing it like this. And mostly you can't really anticipate how far to the side they'll go. So, if anything, just go backwards. It's the best option for these people. I mentioned before that the best type of a level 4 stab is the one who's just backwards with no forwards. Here, for example, I just move backwards and right to open up space for him, and then I move backwards and left to stab him. But in case none of those is an option, which is usually the case, you don't really want to just go forwards and backwards against people like that. You want to go forwards and then forwards and backwards again, in combination with sideways. You want them to keep moving their mouses around. Don't be all steady and make it easy for them. But optimally, you don't want them to make this circle to begin with because it always has the potential to move sideways and away from you, and it's very easy for that to happen. So you want to time your stab to start at the guy's face when he's starting the circle. The less circle you let him do, and the more he stays in front of you instead of to your side, the better you're off. Now obviously there are the more normal ways of getting these people, like overhead stabs and under stabs. In the air they can control themselves as well, or it could give you an extra angle like we know, like with every other level. And you need to know this, especially if they jump around a lot, like these guys, you can take advantage of it really easily. Or with a surprise stab. Obviously, by surprise they usually can't widen their strafe, you can get an easy stab on them, although you're still not getting a matador. Now, and next up we have to consider how this level can collide with level 3, how it can combine with level 3. So what you'd think, it could be just long strafes, one of which will attempt to go around you at some point. And that's it, I guess. You know, I haven't really found a really solid way to deal with these guys. The 4.1 section used to be empty, like this one, because I haven't found out about glue yet. It's only by observing and experimenting that we can find loopholes in people's forms of movement. And speaking of which, it's about time we moved on to the last form of movement that we're going to learn about in these videos. And man, is it an interesting one. This level is about pursuit. People who are this far away from you are suddenly right there and about to catch up to you again. How does this happen? Now that happens because of something that we already know about, and this next level revolves completely around it. Cutting corners. This is the last of the amazing strafe levels 4.3. Now as I said, we've seen this before, because we can do it ourselves as a technique, but nothing more. It's not reflex. There's a difference between using a technique and just naturally moving around. So let's get on with it. People who are on point 3 are essentially players who cut corners while chasing you, among the rest of the times. While taking the inner walls like this, they also use them as cover while chasing you, so you have to either keep running away or open yourself up in order to have them on your sights again. Now we'll talk more about this in particular later, but the level 4.3 almost always has the level 4.1 or level 4.2 in it. So when you get close to the guy, he's almost always going to outstrafe you anyways. Also, by always cutting corners, if you stay put too much, he's going to block your next exit and force you to go back the way you came. He'll always put himself in a certain position from which he could block all your paths completely. And this is obviously especially easy in a corner. He just runs and blocks wherever you were escaping to, and if you try and fight him, he will outstrafe you. This level already has so many perks to it: pursuit ability, cover, area control and denial, not being able to outstrafe it, and it outstrafing you. And all you see while all this is happening is a person just running at you. So with how tightly they take the corners, your first instinct as a spy is to try to corner stab them, but all that you'd find is that they literally aimbot into you as you're going for the stab. No matter how fast, no matter how tight, it just doesn't seem to work out for you much. This is the closest you'll ever get to this kind of person. So what really happens there at the corner? Why can't you stab him? Well, look at where he's moving to. He's not following you, he's following the road ahead of you so that he could stop you. He expects to get to you at any given point, so he stays safe. Whether you keep running or stop at the corner, these guys are masters of going in at the right time. Also, because he's taking the inner walls on purpose, he's looking at the outer walls while he does it, meaning he's looking at you however you're trying to stab him. This is how they aimbot into you. But what does this remind us when they're cutting us off like this? When they get to our side? This reminds us of level 4, right? Yeah, this is what happens when you try to corner stab them. They let you pass. These people are simply bypassing the corner from the inside so that they could strafe across at you from that point. What you need to do against them is to go for a level 4 stab that will happen on the inner walls where he's not looking, just as he starts strafing across behind the corner. And this stab is the point 3 stab. With the amazing strafes and all, you have no chance of outstrafing him out in the open like this, as you see here. But once he's restricted by the inner wall of the corner, all of this changes. Using this special level 4 stab, you can fight these people. Here's how it's done. I'm running over to the left here, and since I'm far away from the corner and he's practically behind it already, he's going to go through just like this. And I want you to remember these arrows from now on, because exactly when he goes in is where you go for forwards and backwards, right after the corner. So rather than a forwards and backwards stab from the outside of the corner, it's from the inside, which is very counterintuitive. Don't just go for no fancy matadors. You're supposed to end up closer to the inner wall than he does, and you cut off him cutting you off. All you have to do is to make sure that you're taking the corner wide enough while backing off to give the other guy confidence in chasing you from the inside and not from the outside. Now, you see a lot of people trying to cut you off and trying to chase you quickly, but there's a fundamental difference between people who are just running after you to the people on this level. Taking corners tightly is considered careless, and taking corners wide is considered smart. But cutting corners is even smarter than taking wide corners in a lot of situations. It's like taking wide corners from the inside, so you gain time instead of losing time. The speed of this level is what makes it so powerful. So again, this guy's gonna blast me away. I'm all the way over there. He's practically behind this turn already. So he's gonna take it to the inner wall instead of wasting time taking it wide. But again, I want you to understand that at this point, there's no stab that's gonna work on him. I can't just corner matador him or C2C him or nothing. I have to lure him to after the corner. That's where I can stab him. It's rare for you to get a stab on the corner, a stab that actually looks like a matador, because even if just by a little bit, it will happen afterwards. Of course, you might get a circle strafish stab here and there, especially if the guy's being really careless against you. But typically, if you go for a matador on the corner, you will either not let him pass through, or he will get behind you. The point of the stab is also not just, oh, run away and then just come right back. No, that's not what it's about. It's not about doing it at the right time, it's about doing it at the right place. And it's definitely not always about changing directions. And that's because they're not actually following you. They're going to the rooms ahead of you. Let's take a look at this here. I'm sort of gesturing that I'm gonna go over to the right place over there. Of course, he's gonna try to cut the corner and get there before I do. And in that particular case, I didn't really need to change directions in order to stab him. Changing direction is just the way it works out a lot of the times. Also, it's not always about chasing you down, like this. It's about positioning too. A lot of people eventually understand that it's more efficient to take the inside of walls instead of the outside, for control over the entire area or just for outstrafing. Sometimes though, if you know that a player is especially aware of his surroundings, you can manipulate him into blocking you from getting to some place on purpose. Get an easy stab on him. But, again, it doesn't have to happen like this. Let's take a look at that spy fighting the Spyro, and the Pyro's already jumping out of the other window, trying to get there before the spy does. He wasn't following him directly, he was following the road ahead of him. One way or another, he's going to keep doing that against everyone. Now in theory, you can lure someone who's cutting corners to go someplace before you so that you could lose him, but in reality, he can just step right back while cutting it, while you have to round the whole thing over. The mechanics of the corner make it easy for him to just get to you again. It's very hard to get away from someone who's on point 3. As we said, even if you suddenly change directions as he's cutting the corner, he is going to catch up to you again. But this also works in your favor. Because of how good the guy's strafe actually is, you're going to have to go for the early level 4 stab. Pretty much from this distance. Now that's definitely really far for a level 4 stab. It's very counterintuitive to start it at this point. But since they get to you faster than what your intuition tells you, it works out. And it's the same for them too. They don't feel like you'll get close to them that soon. Now, one of the most important things that you have to notice while fighting a person who's on point 3 is which corners he can cut. For example, this little turn here, I was backing off and I had no idea that Spy was capable of cutting it. It caught me completely off guard. But obviously, for the next times I face him there, I need to be able to remember and predict that he's gonna do that in that certain spot. Other than clean corners, there are many things that you can cut, so to speak, in this game. Things that he can use or jump over to get to places faster. Things that will put them literally out of your reach. A good way to notice when somebody is on point 3 is to see that other than changing rooms all the time, he keeps jumping on things while moving as a part of his movement. Without disrupting the flow of chasing you or fighting you, it can be simple things like jumping over gaps in order to catch up to you faster, or jumping straight up to those stairs to block the spy from running up there. He's always jumping somewhere. You need to figure out these spots that the other player is capable of cutting, then all you have to do is to figure out how to counter him as he's doing it. Now, it could be just turns that are not actually corners like these stairs. It could be jumping on props, but some of these spots are not as obvious. I'm fighting this pyro here and it seems innocent enough. He is on point 3, but I know that from behind, he's going to try to go around me. Can get him with a nice little reverse stab, but wait. In the beginning of all of this, he jumped over this little mountain to stick to the inner walls of this shack to prevent me from escaping to the left. So because now I know that he can do this rather freely, I can predict it for the next time and stab him right then and there. So yeah, I know that this guy jumps on these rails. All I gotta do is give him the space and he goes through. Now usually he doesn't come down from the rails while cutting it, so I can try to jump on there with him and see if that'll work for me. Maybe not. Now it's pretty hard to stab him normally too while he's cutting the corners, so some people have to concentrate on the prop while jumping onto it. If I can see that this guy isn't exactly looking at me completely while he's jumping on, then I can maybe get a stab differently over there. But let's expand on this whole prop thing. I want to talk to you about special kinds of props. I'm talking about an entire complex that's used as a prop by the other player. He's capable of using its inner walls in order to never lose you. Like this huge shack, for example. This spy can jump on all of its rails at all of its sides to catch up to me at any time. Obviously, I can still cut him off like we've seen until now. And you can get these stabs on the other sides of these corners as well. Seems pretty normal, but let's talk about this for a second. I'm running to the left here and we know this spot. We've already seen this shack in this video before. How someone can cut it, can take the inside of the wall there to get to you faster. Because it's all corners in the end. But most places like this are things that you can actually climb on. Things that can separate you from the spy, monitoring you from above while the spy is circling it. So let's talk about these kinds of places. A complex which he can climb onto while chasing you. Now he's not coming down after you probably, but he might not be that out of reach like he believes. But in case he is, you can try to jump up to the complex with him, try to stab him while you're both on it. But if it's too high up there, on some high up complex like these rocks, then you have to catch them in the moment in which they're jumping onto the complex. Before he gets out of reach like this, you have to cut him off as he climbs on. Don't jump up there before he does, because then he's just going to expect a prop stab. Get him in the spot in which he jumps up. No matter how far away he is while he's up there and not coming down, he gets there from ground level which you passed by. That's where you catch him. Now another option is when they come down. Well, I told you that they probably don't come down. I mean, here I'm escaping to the left. And this guy could stay close to the pillar and attack me from above while I'm escaping. But he doesn't at this point. He comes down to me. Why does this happen? Well, it's kinda simple. Once you stop circling the complex, once you just leave is when they come down. It's simple, but usually you try to stay under there in order to stab them. By stepping backwards, you leave the corner system in which they're trying to control you. Just stop waiting under there, just walk backwards. Gesture that you're leaving. That's how you lure them down. So okay, enough about the complex. Back to just corners now. There are people who don't stick to the inner walls as much as others, obviously. So, right now, I want to talk to you about the person's abilities when it comes to cutting the corner. This guy was cutting it just like this across the bus, but at this point he could have gone further backwards, right? He could have cut it again, stayed close to the bus. Let's try to picture it. This guy is taking the inside of the corners, cutting them, and at this point he's just like that scout. Gonna cut that corner, only that he is really committed to this inner wall. He sticks in there, and he doesn't detach like that scout did. This is how a stab with someone who sticks to the bus could have looked like. He was still backing up in there. He was practically doing this. Some people, like this guy, aren't really committed to the inner wall like you expect them to, so it might not be that obvious to you that they're actually cutting the corners still, and you might get baited into going for a different stab. Remember that he can stick completely to the inner walls, but he can also take it closer to you. Kind of like strafing towards, where some people gravitate more backwards and some people don't. Obviously, the more backwards they pull, the harder it becomes. I predicted this guy would stay way closer to me, but he sticks to the inner wall and backs off way more than what I thought. Now that I know that he does it so much, instead of going for it like he would run into me, I know that he's gonna gravitate backwards into that inner wall, and I can just go straight over there. Was close and it didn't work out, but that first try was nowhere near as close to a stab as that second try. And that's because by understanding what he's capable of, I knew how I should change how I move. So maybe with this kind of person that glues himself to the inner wall like this, maybe you want to try to get the stab on him right before he gets to that point. But stabs that close to the inner wall are still very hard for you. You really want to find a way to lure them away from that inner wall and closer to you. So we talked about this before. Maybe you want to take a step back from the inner walls to lure them closer to you. You want to find ways to make it easier for yourself. Also, if they're on a different plane than you are, then they obviously feel safer and don't take it as tightly. Also, while jumping down, most players can control themselves that well. So most of the reasons are environmental, and you can sometimes manipulate them. For example, by going for the stab in a place where there are hazards on the inner walls. Here he's cutting corners and could have taken it closer to the wall, but then he would have gotten stuck right under the stairs there on the left, so he naturally gets pulled away from that wall and more into you. Now, obviously there could be other more unorthodox reasons for them to get pulled into you. But you shouldn't count on random events though too much. Usually they just always take it as tightly as possible, and it'll always happen faster than what you expect. If you're not in some sort of special spot, the best you can do is really to figure out the optimal timing and positioning for the next times against that certain player. It's important to understand whether to change directions or not, to wait a little more than an inch after the corner or not. Figure out when the other player's strafe is vulnerable to this stab the most. Maybe if you don't wait enough, he's not going through the corner. Maybe if you wait for too long, he'll start backing off after cutting the corner. Maybe you should really plan ahead. If you see that he gets stuck on the inner walls while cutting corners, maybe hope for some hazard on the inner walls will block him enough for you to stab him. Or really, maybe the guy is just really hard to outstrafe with longer strafes. So maybe you wanna try to juke behind the corner a little bit and see if that will work on him. Just try to go about it differently. See which movements make him act the way you want him to. Alright, moving on. Right now I want to talk to you specifically about corners, and exactly when and why a person wouldn't be able to cut them. Let's take a look at this guy. He's gonna take the corner wide, and only then when he's sure of your positioning behind the corner, that's when he can cut it. In this situation, he can't cut it. He can't go through. He's obviously going to stay back there and take it wide. So again, you have to open up this space for him. If you go behind the corner completely, he's going to have to peek. And only then, if he sees that it's open for him, then he can cut it. Combined with the outstrafing and all, this level is about being really careful and then really aggressive all at once. Now obviously this means that in situations where they're not cutting the corner, like here, you could get them with the normal C2C stabs. Now this next guy is going to be on point 3. This corner is way too tight for him to cut. Now I know that he likes staying behind corners when he's not sure. I knew he would back off. So again, for people who are chasing you, and especially from far away, if they're convinced that you're gonna try to come back through the corner and corner stab them or something, then they're not going to cut it. They're going to take it normally. But once they see you behind the corner, that's the chance they have to cut it if they think you might escape. But when they don't have your exact positioning behind the corner, again, they're either gonna peek through or take it wide. Of course, different people are going to have different distances from which they're comfortable cutting corners. I was almost completely behind the corner with this scout and this medic, but they were still comfortable in taking the inside of the wall, try to get to me faster. Now of course, some people are not as comfortable doing this, or the environment forces them to. This guy's taking the inner wall, but then he takes it wide for a second before taking the inner wall again. They're being more careful by doing this, but they're going to be a lot slower. At some point though, they have to take it wide to actually see where you are, right before coming at you, all in the same motion. Of course, there will be people who will cut the corner, then realize that they got too close and they'll back off. There are some people who cut corners without the intention of cutting it to the end. Let's take a look at this guy. He chases me down and is about to jump on this prop in order to cut the corner and get to me faster. But once he realizes he got close enough, then he just starts taking it wide. Let's take a look at another example here. I know that this guy is on point 3, about to cut the corner, and then he just sorta breaks off. That's what he did over there. He came real close and then he took it wide. Now some people might break away because they got too close to you. Some people will do this even if you keep running away. This means that they might not fall for the point 3 stab after the corner, but it does mean that they keep their backs to the inner wall before the corner, and that maybe that's where you should go for it. So okay, to summarize, a player on point 3 would usually cut the corner, get up there before you do, but at some points, he won't feel like he has to or that he can. It's mostly a way to pursue somebody to prevent him from leaving, and once they've caught up to you, that's when they start fighting normally. Usually with either 4.2 or 4.1, creating this really amazing balance between staying really far and then getting really close by cutting corners. Essentially with 4.3, usually you'd get other levels too. Let's take a look at this spy. I noticed that he's on level 4, but not quite. He's on level 4.2. So I decide to run away from him to bet on the fact that he'll take the inside of the corner. That in addition to fighting with 4.2, he's going to pursue me with 4.3. Let's take a look at this scout. He's on point 3, and he's able to cut corners in a pretty interesting way. When he sees me climbing the stairs, he jumps up there to block me from climbing up. Now he takes it wide and then cuts it again. Stab from the inner wall. And here again, I could catch him as he's doing this, to get him with the point 3 stab as he's jumping up there. But when there are no corners, when I'm there where he feels like I'm not escaping, where he feels there's nothing to block me, he's gonna fight me, and he's gonna fight me with 4.1. See this? He goes around me, then he backs off, getting with a nice gluish stab. So point 3s typically have 2 levels, and the more he's committed to the point 3 and the inner wall, the more you can try those stabs on him. And the more he's committed to his other levels, the more you could try those on him. It also depends on how safe they feel chasing spies, and on the situation. Here I got the jump on the Spyro, so he couldn't read the corners and where I was going for so well, so he moved with point 1 as reflex. So even if they're very committed to the point 3 strafes, when they're not in a situation to cut corners, you can get them with the other stabs that correspond with their other levels. That also means that after they've cut the corner and got stopped or something, they're still on level 4. You can still get them with those stabs as well. Just a well-timed manage your matadors, and there we go. Also, still being on level 4, it means that they do all of these stuff that level 4s really like doing. Like jumping at you from the corners, which you can time and exploit to your advantage, or trying to jump over you on slopes or on the stairs. If you can see that they're doing this sort of thing, then you can get them like that as well. But actually, moving on, one of the best ways to make them cut corners is by actually running away from them. By turning your back at them, you convince them that you're going to leave, or that you're planning for something and you're gonna leave and come right back. And that's a golden opportunity for people to cut corners against you. That's because they know that most players don't expect them to be this fast. So as you're running away normally, you can just turn right back. And it works surprisingly well for people this aware and confident in their strafing and of their understanding of pursuit. You can take advantage of that really easy. You can gesture just like here that you're going someplace with your back at them, and that's just a golden opportunity for them to try to get there before you do. Still, again, remember that this is not some surprise stab, it's not a matador. For example, here I know how far behind me this pyro is. I know that I don't even have to change directions, because it's a stab that happens on the inner wall. It's still the 0.3 stab. Obviously, still being the same stab, you can do it in reverse and you can do it even before the corner on the inner wall. You can play around with it. Now, speaking of playing it out, about overhead and underhead angles. Remember this fact for every level. The fact that you're going for a stab from below or from above does not change the nature of the stab. See where this guy turned? Whether I jump or not, I should go for a stab that takes into account him cutting the corner. You know, obviously. So yeah, you know, you jump and take into account that he takes the inside of a corner and all of that. But there's something more to it. I found that if a person cuts the corner while on different planes than you, especially if he was behind a wall or something while he was cutting it to get to you faster, you're going to be able to outstrafe him easily for how much he gravitates towards you while cutting on different planes like this. So now for the understabs. So obviously it can work exactly like you think. You lure them into one direction and then you go forwards and backwards. And yeah, it could work like that. Could also happen when they're jumping on props to get to you faster. Nothing new here. But then again, let's take a look at one of these understabs. It's a guy who just drops straight down in an attempt to drop down safely. Ends up getting stabbed anyways. Now some people only drop down like that, but let's try to connect all this to what we know about this level for a second. When a guy on 0.3 does this, there's a reason to it other than just staying safe. It's because you moved towards some room that's under him and behind him. So he drops down and then he backpedals in order to block you from getting there. They're cutting the corner vertically instead of horizontally. So those stabs that seemed simple are pretty much the same as this 0.3 stab. How they look in the end depends on where they start. These last two players both wanted to just drop down and block me from getting to the health. All they did is keep themselves to the inner wall of the turn which they were taking. In the case of dropping down, this is just the way it happens sometimes. So when you see someone dropping straight down after you, it might be because he was on 0.3. But obviously, of course, depending on when you're moving to, they could jump someplace completely different to try and stop you from getting there. And that just about wraps it up. Sort of. We've learned a lot in this section, and this is the last of the amazing level 4 points. This is the last consistent form of movement in this game. But for me, that just means that we've covered all the basics, things that every player, in my opinion, should know. Next part is last part, I promise. It's about using this knowledge about movement that we learned while playing, and it's also, in my opinion, the most important part, so you've already gone this far. I'll see you there.